Welcome to.
The Relationship Guys.
I'm Michael Bartlett.
And I'm Justin Elsey. And so, to tell you a little bit about ourselves and our podcast, Michael, why don't you start?
Yes, sure. My name is Michael Bartlett. I'm a master metaphysical astrologer. I practice traditional and modern astrology as well as esoteric astrology. I weave that in with my core energetic background, business experience, intuitive background. I'm an author, I'm a teacher. I love working in this stuff every day. How about you, Justin? Tell us about you.
Yeah, I'm a archetypal Jyotish astrologer, so I do both Western and Eastern Jyotish astrology and combine the two. And I like working with natal charts and progressions, and so I go really, really deep. I have a Virgo moon, so I love analyzing, and I also work with predictive astrology and esoteric astrology, and I'm also a yoga meditation teacher and author. And I live in the Pacific Northwest. And Michael, where do you live?
I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
All right. And what are we going to talk about today?
Well, today is our inaugural episode of The Relationship Guys. And, the question is, are they in or are they out?
Are they out?
We're going to be breaking down couples using astrology to describe sex, friendship, and coupledom, seeing basically how energies mix, mingle, what gives us pretty colors in relationships, and what kind of colors or what kind of blends might not end up working out so well in the long run.
And like you like to say, Michael, are we chasing a unicorn here, right? So what we're going to be doing during the course of this is we're going to be looking at some well-known couples. And if you're interested, which we'll mention again at the end of the podcast today, if you're interested in us taking a look at your charts with you and maybe your fiance or somebody, your boyfriend or girlfriend, or just a good friend, just email us and we'll take a look at your charts. So, drum roll, Michael, who's our first couple that we're looking at?
Our first episode is going to be about Prince Harry and Princess Meghan.
That's right. And we're going to look at how they interact with one another and why they're maybe a power couple and what the future holds for them.
Definitely.
So let's get
started. The way that we both like to look at it is we're going to be looking at the basic points within an astrological chart. We're going to be looking at the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, Eros, Nessus, and Juno. The last four are asteroids. And as you can see, each of these planets or asteroids represents basic needs that each individual has within the relationship, as well as the relationship as a whole.
We'll be looking at is how one person's, let's say, Eros, which is Cupid, affects the other person's Eros and how they're aspecting. So we'll look at major aspects, squares, trines, sextiles, and conjunctions with these planets and asteroids.
First chart we're going to look at, we have to start with the prince. Would you like to start? I know you have some extensive notes written.
No, I'll let you go ahead. You go ahead. Wherever you want to, let's leap off. I'll let you take off and leap off on this one.
Well, I mean, for me, like what immediately strikes me about his chart is there's really hardly anything under the horizon. If we look at this space between the ascendant and the descendant, which would be in that opposite space, here on the at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock on the chart, we see that the vast majority is occupied. Whether you're an astrologer or not, you can just see that that's an occupied space. So you know that this is a person who's going to be very much dealing with others, interacting with others. And basically what I like to say, they need other people's counsel. The only planet he has under the horizon is his Chiron.
And the moon below the horizon as well there. It's in the fourth house. And so I love how you really started out in looking at what the objective, which is the upper part of the chart, versus the subjective. So he's definitely more objective personality as we dive down in the chart. But I think, so let's start with that bottom part of the chart, that moon there in Taurus, I think really shows how, when you look at him and his brother, they always talk about Harry's close relationship with Diana, his mother. And I think this really is highlighted with the moon in the fourth house there, the house of mother. And then that Chiron in Gemini, which means, can have some issues with communications. Actually, we'll talk a little bit about that later when we compare her chart, but that will, I think, definitely comes into play.
What I notice about his chart is that he's got a lot of earth, water, and just a little bit of fire in there. And the only air he has is that Venus and Chiron.
So what I like about the top part of his chart, what jumps out to me, he's a Virgo. And he's a very strong, intelligent Virgo with the sun conjunct Mercury. As we know, Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo. So, of course, he's very smart and strategic thinking. And he also looks for that in relationships because that's conjunct his Juno. And Juno was the wife of Jupiter, represents marriage or relationship. So he actually has that relationship going with liking somebody's very intelligent and smart. And then the other thing that jumps out to me, that because I love Mars, is his Mars over in the 11th house. And he's also got Uranus there, which is the planet of rebellion, revolution, change. And because this is a house of community, this kind of portends, this is one of the things in his chart that's kind of a wow factor, that, you know, at some point in his life, he was going to change community. And we see that where he's moved to the US, and he started the Invictus Games so that Mars and Sag can be competitive. But he's also got Eros there. Cupid is right next to his Mars. So that could mean that he actually needs a little bit of independence and freedom in his relationship. And as we just saw, he likes a lot of times goes to the UK without Meghan. You know, he needs that independence and space and a little bit of exploration. So that may later on in life, maybe we'll see. They got to keep it going fun in the relationship. What do you think about that top part?
Definitely. The other thing that I think is really fun to point out, and that it shows like such a great relationship with his grandmother, because as an angles person, as you know, I always look at the angle part, and with that Saturn conjunct his midheaven in Scorpio, so powerful. He was born during Queen Elizabeth's second Saturn return. They had a very, very special relationship that really, because one of the other questions here is really about Harry's paternity, one of those things that comes up from time to time. You know, we've got Jupiter and Neptune in the 12th house. We've got 8th house, Sun and Mercury. So, you know, there might be a little secret here behind the scenes.
I will say one other thing about his nodes, because I do look at the Jyotish chart. It kind of sometimes can give you kind of perspective with those nodes, you know, south node, north node, what is their direction in life, what they're trying to accomplish. And you see a really strong, ethical, responsible personality here who wants to be a friend to everybody, friendship to the world. But he does have this thing where he's learning to cut ties or purify with the nodes. So it seems like his archetype a little bit is here, you know, trying to discover who he is, and he's supposed to change community in this life and actually figure out who he has to be a friend to and who he can't be a friend with in this lifetime. And so at times he's going to have to make certain changes with that.
And it is kind of an interesting thing with having the moon, Chiron, and his north node down here in the lower hemisphere for himself. So it really implies that there is this real outward thing, but then he really does need to kind of go inward, have some time away, have some space to really kind of find out and kind of think himself through and process.
Right. And I might also point out, you and I talked about this a little bit. He does have a finger of God, a yod, between Pluto, Neptune, and his north nodes. Pluto being the planet of death and rebirth. Neptune represent the collective with his north node. So again, he's supposed to have some dynamic upheaval within the collective and basically change and move.
It's a fourth house north node, and with that Pluto and Neptune, I mean, he was, I would say he was destined to split from his family.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Yep.
Great. Let's go ahead and go on to Princess Meghan.
Princess Meghan. So, as you were pointing out before, he had all his in the objective space, but she's got most of her stuff in the subjective space below the horizon. So, what do you think about that, Michael?
I mean, it really kind of shows out in the way things have been going on, right? I mean, it's been, even though she has been a movie star, even though she's had a very outward facing life, one of the real hardships for her living in Britain was the invasion of privacy, right? The lack of respect for her. When people have this amount of planetary focus below the horizon, they really don't like people knowing their business. A Mars in the 12th house, don't follow me.
I agree with you. Whereas it seemed like Harry has this whole dynamic with responsibility and ethics and what he needs to be responsible to in life. She's this thing, she's having to deal with relationships, familial relationships. His is more of a personal self-identification thing. With her, it's more about emotions within families, because that ascendant in Cancer makes her nurturing, compassionate with that Mars at that degree, 11 degrees there in Cancer. But she's got this big conjunction down in the third house there of the moon, Saturn, and Jupiter all in Libra. And that just tells me this is like the high priestess card in the tarot. She's got this judgment about relationships. And of course, with a couple other things in the chart there, which we could talk about if we have time, she's definitely going to have some issues with her family, with Pluto in the fourth house. And next to Juno there, she's learning about the impermanence of social bonds, especially directly related to family. And as we know, she's had an issue with her father and her sister, which is third house, of course, siblings.
I mean, it's really interesting. She has an Aries midheaven with Pholus up there, with the ruler of that midheaven in the 12th house in Cancer, who are unseen enemies. It's usually people she considers family, where they kind of come after her, unfortunately. And yeah, I mean, she's here trying to be, she's got North Node, Mercury, and Sun in Leo. See me roar, see me be present, hear me. This is such a Leonine presence as well. She's married a royal, and she keeps getting approached from luxury goods, services, sorts of things to promote their labels. I mean, which, to be honest, I think is really well indicated with that North Node, Mercury, and Sun in Leo right there in the first house.
Yeah, I agree. Very, very creative personality there. You can see why she was an actress with Sun and Mercury and North Node and Leo in the first house, right?
Uranus in the fifth. She's going to get in there. I would imagine that she goes pretty deep into her roles. I would imagine that when she did act, I bet she really kind of took on the persona.
Absolutely. And I tend to find with people with Uranus and Scorpio in the fifth house have abilities for photography, for writing, for film, or even music. She has.
It's a capturing of something deeply transcendental that most
Yeah.
people aren't even aware of.
She also has a finger of God or Yod in the chart. This is what's interesting. It really mirrors Harry's because she also has that sextile between Pluto and Neptune, and it connects with a quincunx to her Chiron in Taurus. So it's his North Node in Taurus, but with her, that it's the Chiron in Taurus. So again, she's trying to find this safe space within the collective here. And one of the other things, looking at her notes from the Jyotish perspective, is that she has the strength to win. This is a powerful woman, and it's just the goal to be won. And she also has this aspect as a healer. And I think that's part of that finger of God, that Chiron, and because she has this compassion and nurturing with that ascendant in Cancer really comes through in her chart. It's just she's got to figure out which relationships to nurture and which ones not to.
That's hard when you have Neptune in Sagittarius, because it's like it wants to find the truth, but truth is everywhere. And Mars in the 12th house in Cancer, it's somewhere here, but I don't have a light on and I can't really see it. So
Right.
it really is kind of hard for getting that kind of level of discernment going on. We can start seeing this idea of like where each of these individuals have some strengths that the other one lacks, and therefore bringing them together gives us a better view of things. There are three ways of looking at relationships, and the first one we're going to look at is what we call comparison or synastry, which is kind of really the simplest of all ways of doing it. And so for those of you who are not well versed in astrology and don't really quite understand astrology, we're hoping to present this in a way that it shows these energies that work together in people's lives, in their relationships, and how they really show up in the chart. And follow along as best you can. And also, leave comments, ask us questions. We love interacting with people. Like, share with your friends, and subscribe, because we really want this to do well.
Looking at the synastry charts, I want to point out something so the one on the left is Harry in the inner wheel, and she's on the outer wheel. And one thing that's interesting I want to point out to this chart, if you look up at the fourth quadrant in this chart, his Eros is on her Neptune. And so he was destined to marry a foreigner here. His Eros is on the collective planet and Neptune there in Sag. So he was destined to go outside the bounds and be interested in a foreigner.
And that's merging loving. There's a lot of passion in researching for this. There are rumors where they're caught fighting in public and they're doing all these other things. But I don't know. I to be honest, look at that as a bit of passion. I mean, Mars in a fire sign. He's got Mars in
Yeah,
Sagittarius. He's not going to have any trouble showing his ardor, his love, his passion, and everything. And so, and I think that's a really, if anything, to me, that's a real love contact there with Eros and
right.
Neptune together.
Absolutely. And I might also point out that his moon is on her Chiron. So they have a moon Chiron conjunction, which actually in a way means Chiron Taurus, and it can mean a person that needs that physicality, that touching, that need for safety and space. And with his moon in Taurus, he's able to give that to her. I mean, he is able to be that mother in a way for her to help her with the moon on the Chiron.
Her Jupiter, his Venus conjunct, but the thing is, it's his Venus with her Jupiter, but Saturn and Pluto are also involved. So it gives it a little bit of a sticky. Sometimes I
Right,
would think that would be a little bit challenging. Sometimes he probably has to, I would think, kind of talk her off the edge a little bit. I mean, what's kind of nice about that in a way is you've got these very definitive Saturn and Pluto in Libra, very definitive energies in a sign that really doesn't like to be definitive. The
right.
Jupiter can handle it, but that Saturn and that Pluto want to have a singular answer.
Yeah. And I might also point out their moons are trined. Their moons are, so this does mean a good flow of energy between their moons. His is, of course, in a Taurus and hers is in Libra. So they have a good energy there. And then where some challenges may come in at is that his Chiron in Gemini actually squares her Venus in Virgo. You also see in the chart where his Mars squares her Venus. So what we see is her Chiron in Taurus, she needs that physicality, that touching, that safety and support, but he may not always communicate well, and so there can be sometimes where they're not on the same page, and maybe as far as intimacy. It's really all about physicality and communications with them. I might also point out her Venus also squares his Mars and Chiron, but her Mars trines his Saturn, so they can really work well together. If you watch the Netflix special, one of the main things that brought them together, coming from two different worlds, is their need to be of service to the community, and that's how they're this powerhouse. The struggle for her would change in social status that she has to deal with, and he is the type which will revolt against privilege. They make a good match where she's trying to come up to a level, but he's coming down a level. So they're a good match in that way.
The other thing I find that's very fascinating, I brought it up when we first looked at their individual charts, was the hemispheric focus shifts now when we bring these two into synastry with one another. They actually have the same general focus of signs from Cancer all the way over to Capricorn, with a limited amount from Pisces through Gemini. But it's very interesting when you look at through Harry's eyes, it's all outward, and through Meghan's eyes, it's all inward, but depending on how each of them does it. So in a way, it kind of gives them a bit of a balance, but still a hemispheric focus, with each of them having that Chiron falling in that same hemisphere in that regard.
Right. And I think brings a lot of good stuff to helping him, supporting him as far as his how he expresses himself and his self authenticity. And then I think he is really responsible to the family. You see that a lot in their talking, and it's really interesting. You know, some people would think, well, she was the one that pushed him to leave, but when you look at his astrology, he had to revolt. He had to leave. It was actually him, and she's actually very supportive in giving him that doorway to changing and getting out of that particular situation, which shows he, whether it was her or somebody else, he would have done it in either way.
And that's what's really exciting again with astrology, is that we can look at this and we can see that, this really was their path. This would be the type of person he would be drawn to. There would be a bit of a glove-like fit in a sense of what it is that they're looking for and what they're moving towards. As far as like what we've looked at so far with the synastry, I would say a power couple so far is what we're seeing. Of course, there are a little bit of
Absolutely.
detrimental issues that come up, but so far we're looking like
Yeah.
pretty in.
He has Eros in Sag, and Eros is Cupid again. So he has Eros in Sag, a fire sign, and she has that Eros in Taurus. So she needs that physical touch. He's like can be aggressive, and so he needs a little bit of also independence and change. Sag likes to explore. So in order to keep their relationship going well, as long as he continues to really show her physical affection and give her a safe space, and she could bring a lot of change into the lovemaking, they could stay together definitely.
I used to think of like one of my favorite inconjuncts is actually Scorpio Gemini. But now when I think about it, Sagittarius to Taurus is a really lovely one too, because the Sagittarius can go out there, go out and have fun, and go out and get the luxury goods to make the Taurus happy. And also the displays of love and valor in a traditional way. It kind of gives me goosebumps as I'm thinking about
Yeah.
it. But I think he would get very excited of being chivalrous for her in
Oh
that
yeah.
kind of sense. I think there'd be something really exciting for both of them in that regard.
Right, and because we also know that that energy of Sag likes to travel and explore. If you look at the Netflix documentary, after they first met and started getting serious, they went off quietly, secretly, to this African, like really long vacation. And so I could see if we kind of watch them, you may see them like he'll want to say, well, let's go here and have a romantic getaway. You know, that Sag wants, let's go travel over here. So we may see that as a general theme, you know.
So you want to tell us about the second way to look at relationships in astrology?
The second way is a composite. We look at the midpoints between each of the person's planets and asteroids and other points in the chart. And then the composite chart really shows if you combine the two personalities together. This is, you know, if we combined all those planets, this is the kind of personality that the relationship or they become.
We've looked at each of the individuals. Now we're kind of like looking at that third entity, which is the relationship itself, these two people coming together.
Here's the composite of Harry and Meghan. And I find this very interesting that we have an Aries ascendant right here. And that's a really strong indicator. What do you think about that, Michael?
I do too. And especially, you know, I'm an angles person. I see every angle in this chart being activated except for that Capricorn angle. So, I mean, I see Phallus, which you are such an expert. What would you say as far as Phallus on the ascendant?
Well, so I think how people will perceive them, because Pholus in Greek mythology was also a centaur, and it represents sudden action, sudden events, almost like death, because he was responsible ultimately for Chiron's death. So we see here where people will see them as maybe sometimes being reactive, and we saw that even though it was kind of in the works. There was like at the moment, like when they left Canada, they just immediately left and went down to LA. It's sort of this reactionary, sudden, they're apt to take sudden action with things.
Which is even more heightened because it's Aries. And then also, if we think of Aries as being the right to be, because that's a fundamental issue with this relationship, right? She's a
Yeah.
commoner and he's the extra.
Right. They both have that thing they're dealing with where they're having to come together. They both have some issue they're dealing with. Yeah, absolutely.
And how interesting that they end up with Moon in Cancer, you know, because what they're both
Oh,
wanting
yeah.
to create is their own home. It's not quite in the fourth house. I'm going to give it fourth house territory because it's pretty darn close to that angle. It's 28 degrees. It's also, to be honest, I think of that as a very sophisticated degree of understanding, because what you see is that even though they've been the oddness that they've both experienced with their own families, the olive branch continues to be offered.
Right. I totally agree. And I love how you point out how important that moon is on the IC. So this does tell me that out of this relationship, there's a lot of emotional healing taking place between the both of them. And the fact that he does have Nessus, which you know is something that has to be transformed in a relationship, and Leo, I see that there's a lot of healing for their both self-expression in the chart. It's almost like they're each other's family, helping heal each other's need for self-expression.
Definitely. And I also think about with the Mercury too, because it's been this fine line. I mean, in a sense, here we get back below the horizon with that Mercury down there in Leo. But it's also, and I think you spoke to a little bit earlier, is like the way it kind of comes across, I think sometimes appears whiny or indulgent. And I don't know. I mean, for the vast majority of how humans are living on the planet, I'm sure it appears that way to a lot of people, but the truth is, this is their reality. These are the things that these two individuals are dealing with. And
Right,
the existential aspect of it, that Pluto squaring that moon,
right,
right? So, I
right.
mean, that's a constant pressure in a sense with that. And then that Saturn's there and it's creating this sort of, when I think of Saturn and Pluto, I mean, that's a pressure cooker. Saturn has that ability to hold the radioactive material. And it's also in the sign of Libra, which is like about relationships. So let's tear down our ideas about relationship, but let's keep the foundational elements that continue to work. And how does that work with our emotional nature and how we want to define what family is for ourselves?
I totally agree with you. That's really kind of the probably the most important part of this chart is that all that Libra over there, because we see the Mars is in Virgo. So this is a relationship where they are strategist and they're going to analyze everything here. And then it's right next to Venus in Libra and Juno in Libra. Juno represents marriage relationship. And I find also, I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but when a person has Mars and Venus in the chart, there is a relational that's on itself, no matter what sign it is in, that's an undercurrent of relationship theme in their life with that too. And as you appropriately mentioned, Pluto and Libra with Saturn, definitely letting go of non-attachment with relationships, that this is a couple that's learning together to analyze the right relationships that to deal with in life, but they're always trying to get along with folks here.
I love that the Mars is in Virgo at 29 degrees. I love its Venus in Libra at 0 degrees. I mean, what a beautiful conjunction that brings a wealth of energy from each of those respective signs. I mean,
Right.
it gives me goosebumps again. And that's at 29 degrees, Mars. That moon's at 28 degrees. The Eros is at 28 degrees. The midheaven's at 29 degrees. The IC is at 29 degrees. Them sticking together and really putting their energy into it. And I think that perseverance that's going to be brought out by that Saturn and Pluto are really going to help.
Yeah.
Really I think has a really high success rate as long as they do their work. They're lucky that they're a modern couple.
Yeah.
I think they're lucky that she's a Californian. I think they're lucky they've moved west. I mean, I don't think they could really be looking at a lot of these things in England. No offense to my English friends, but I mean, that kind of
Right.
looking at relationship is
Well,
very different in the West Coast.
look at their eighth house with this relationship. I mean, my goodness, they've got Uranus and Neptune and Sag in the eighth house, and so we know this can be how money comes to them. And so this is a couple that's supposed to get out there and explore, travel, and get to know new people. And I might also top this off about relationships. Come on, Jupiter and Scorpio in the seventh house. They're transforming
Ooh, baby.
relationships, right?
Yep.
But I
Yep.
think, there's a certain amount of the collective that's going to resonate with them because, again, up at the upper fourth quadrant there, we see Cupid or Eros in Aquarius in their 11th house of community. So they're definitely going to have a following, and there's going to be a lot of people that love them.
That Neptune and Uranus in the eighth house in Sagittarius too is like, hey, we've got to tell our story. We've got to break with the tradition. And it's, I mean, because it's movies, it's imagery, it's archetypes. And that's really, they're playing with all those on a very big level. Plus the whole royal family's in such a big shift anyway. I mean, this is just one aspect of a much greater shift that's happening with them. So the third way is what's called the Davison, or what they call a time and space, because we're talking about with the second option with the midpoint, that's only really a midpoint between each of those planets in those two charts. When we talk about this, we're talking about taking the distance between the two. What's nice about this is you actually get to use this chart as something that you can progress, use transits and other astrological techniques, and they will literally show very significant times. If we
Yeah.
were really to go into, and I know you want to say something about what's going on with his transits, we might at a future time, especially with someone who's been together with someone for a long time, take this Davison chart, progress it and transit it and say, wow, you've been in this relationship for 30 years. This is the reason why you're having these
Right.
very different experiences going on.
Right. And also I might point out, if I could, about that, if people are trying to figure out the difference between Composite and Davison about the outcome, is that this chart, because it does take that midpoint between the birthdays and locations, this is kind of the destiny the destiny of where it's going as far as the relationship destiny.
I also see in this one is they're
Sure.
both kind of splayed, which
Yeah.
shows, and when we say splay, meaning there aren't very many empty spaces. We have a ninth house empty spot. We have the fifth house empty. We have the third house empty. There's a lot going around, which means there's a level of adaptability to what life offers. Sometimes people would say it's a jack of all trades, but a master of none. But I actually just see it as adaptability to what life throws at us.
I agree. But, if we look at both these charts, they say a lot together. I mean,
They
in this
really
one,
do. Yep.
you got the moon still on the IC in Cancer. You still have that Mars and Venus conjunction, but now it's in that 11th house of community. So where the sun is at. So that would tell me that this is a couple that is supposed to get out there and be engaged. So exactly like the last chart was showing.
It's interesting because we still have Neptune in the eighth house in Sagittarius, but now it's conjunct the South Node. And we bring this Jupiter and Uranus closer in Sagittarius. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, as you know. With that Uranus there, I would think there would really need to be almost ruthless honesty. Like if they aren't, I would think stuff would really kind of come out. I mean, I also think that's also mirrored Nessus in Leo, and it's retrograde. I think things get revealed. Chiron in Taurus, here this theme again with this kind of right to be.
Right. Oh yeah, and I like how you pointed out the Neptune on the South Node, and I like that that's a 2-degree Capricorn. I think that really is showing how they are not just going to be known as just a couple from the UK or the United States. This is a global couple, and I
Right.
think that shows up with that Jupiter, Uranus, and Sagittarius 7th house. They're going to make friends all over the world. However, because that Jupiter is squaring the moon, I think they're having to figure out where they live. Where is their home as they explore the world?
And Uranus there doesn't really help either. I would see this, what gives them great joy and benefit in their relationship and actually expands their relationship is foreign travel.
Yeah,
Getting to have those experiences like, oh, wow, I don't know what I'm going to have for dinner tonight.
If we look at the 10th house of quote unquote career or outward facing here in this chart of where the relationship's going or what it's going to look like there, I love how they've got that Mercury there in Aquarius along with Juno and Cupid. It's really about getting out there and communicating. And if we look at what they've done so far, I mean, Harry's written a book. They've done a Netflix special series together. It's all communications.
Exactly. Yeah. Very well indicated. Yeah. I mean, Uranus and Jupiter are sextiling Mercury in Aquarius.
Yeah.
They are ambassadors. They're here to really share and spread this word. They got this South Node in Capricorn. Their midheaven is in Capricorn. I would say actually distilling what
Right.
needs to be done because we've got Pluto squaring the midheaven IC.
I think a really great positive thing here, they're going to really continue to show their compassion and love. Look at that Mars and Pisces trining that Cancer moon. That's a really compassionate, nurturing, healing. And they're going to be a couple, I think. The destiny part, one of the themes here, Michael, I would think is maybe they're actually helping heal relationships in the world.
Yeah, I no doubt, especially this because I mean, with that Jupiter Uranus in Sagittarius, I mean that is such a, I would almost say a pressure
Mm-hmm.
to live in that, and it's mutable. So there's always this aspect of adjusting, which is really great. And yeah, that Mars in Pisces. I mean, the other thing is that Mars in Pisces and that Venus at 2 degrees of Aries, that's the world point. So there's
Yeah.
also something sacred in the part of the way that each of them is representing the masculine and the feminine. And it's very interesting because it's Venus in Aries and it's
Yeah.
Mars in Pisces. So it's kind of like this flipped aspect of it, but that's also this benefit of when two people come together creating a third individual that is this unification. So I
Yeah.
really love that, and especially in relationships or like something like this, I love seeing all these pairings because it's like these almost super twin powers activated in a sense, right?
Right. And you know what? And we can't ignore the elephant in the room. You know, Chiron right on the ascendant. You're the angles guy. I mean, before you say anything, I think this kind of again leads into, because it's in the first house. They're the type of people who are going to heal relationships, be unconventional because the healer aspect. I think that'll also be because that is squaring the south node of Neptune there. It's kind of, where do they find their safe space? You know, where do they find that? And what do you think about that, since you're the Maverick Angles guy there?
We've got Chiron again within this place of like the right to be, but also what it strikes me too is this issue around the need for money to support their lifestyle. I don't mean just the lifestyle to which Meghan has become accustomed and that Harry's always had, but the lifestyle of having and needing a security detail and not getting the sort of income from the family that used to be there. So there's a
Right.
bit of a motivation a lot of times for them to try and figure out ways to generate the income. I don't think they're going to have any trouble
I was
in
going to say,
Capricorn.
and that's where we get to the transits, because there's a couple of things I want to tell you that where they're going to be focused on, if you want to go there.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so they both are having changes of progressed moons. And this coming year, she's dealing with the progressed moon in Taurus, and he's dealing with his progressed moon in Sag. And both of these, and remember, we were talking about the Sag Taurus thing. Guess what? Both of these progressed moons are in their 10th house this coming year. So, and
Together. Wow.
yeah, and so
Nice.
there's going to
Okay.
be definitely this focus on getting things going, and the fact that Jupiter and Uranus are pretty much sitting on his north node, and with the south node, I might also point, just back up here again, the south node in Libra is going over his Venus in the ninth house right now, and we see that he officially changed his residency, that relationship there. Okay, and that in that relationship, and when he changes residency, there's a, they didn't describe it, but he also did a business filing for a new business, and that would make sense with that Jupiter Uranus going over his north node. So we see with him, you're going to see some new business stuff come out with them, talking about money. I think that's going to be a major 10th house focus coming up, you know.
Beautiful. I just want to say one more thing. So if you look here where it says relationship Davison, and you'll see that it says February 24th, 1983, which is actually before Harry was born. So just showing like how it does this midpoint in space, meaning it's kind of taking the space in between. When they moved to LA, it was a very
Spur of the
auspicious
moment.
moment, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, how it happened was they were in Vancouver, living on Vancouver Island up here north of Seattle here. The paparazzi had found out where they were living, they were being bothered, and the pandemic was happening, and they just upped like at early in the morning. You know, Harry does this video at 6 a.m., 14 March from the plane, took her mother, the dogs, the kids, and whoosh, went to LA. Look at the moon in Sag right on the midheaven. Let's get out of here, right? Let's go.
And when we were just talking about Taurus a second ago, and there's Uranus and Venus right there
Yeah.
saying, hey, we need to make a change for our higher values, for what is going to be in alignment with what we need. And
And
with the strong Venus that they both have in their charts, I think it's crucial.
yeah, and look at that south node in the house of community. That, and we know the south node's like an augur, it brings change. It's in Capricorn, so it's making some change with community there. With certain planets, I've noticed in clients' charts, certain planets going through the 11th house can mean that a person actually moves. So we see this, and because the north node's in Cancer, like you said, they're trying to, you know, a good place for their children. There's that north node in Cancer in the fifth house.
And that sun is 6 days away from being at the world point, 5.5 days actually. And then I think it's very interesting because of that Capricorn playing such a strong role with especially Harry and with their Davison chart, that here we've got such a preponderance of, it's almost like subconsciously they're being moved along. Mars, Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn at 29 degrees, the ruler of Capricorn in its own house at that anaretic degree. I mean, kind of almost, I would say almost a make or break situation in a sense.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's interesting too, speaking about the moon in Sag, it's actually trining the Chiron in Aries in the second house. And I know also the second house can represent real estate, and also when certain planets transit that, it can mean a moving. And so you pointed out the Sun and Neptune there with the Chiron. It's like, well, there's a wound here where we're living here. We need to find a new community, and where we're going to be with Neptune.
Fire's so responsive, you know, with that moon Chiron, that makes perfect sense. And that Sagittarius plays such an important role for them. I think as the days would have gone on, would have felt like it was just ratcheting it up for them energetically.
You were pointing out before, that 12th house, you just can't let go of that, because that Mars, Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn there, a lot's going on that's outside of their control. But because it's in Capricorn there, it can realize they were having to go through letting go of fear subconsciously in this movement and what their structure of life is going to be at. So they might have like been going through feeling really unstable at this with this move, you know, a little bit. But it's going to
and a loss of status, right? I mean, Pluto, Saturn in Capricorn. Saturn does rule Capricorn, but I think with Pluto being there, I think something has to be paid. There's a loss of some sort. There's a death in order to claim that which you really need. And so I think they're really kind of like, hey, we're not getting the response we need. I mean, and to be honest, Canada is a Commonwealth. It's English. It's very similar in its attitudes and understandings. It's not England, but it has similar tones.
Right. So how would you summarize it? Are they in?
Are they in?
They out?
Are they out? I would say they're in. I mean, I would say 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're made for each other. I think down the road, because we see every relationship has challenges, I'm going to go back to the communications with them and keeping the relationship alive with that Sag, very physical, as you can see in this, but needs that fire, right? Needs that fire.
Exactly. We would like to welcome you, our listeners out there, to submit your chart. If you've been in a relationship for a long time, business partner, love relationship, or maybe it's someone you've had a crush on for a long time and you've been friends and you've been wondering, like, what would it be like to be in a relationship with this person? Offer your chart. You can feel free to send it to either Justin at justinelzy@gmail.com or myself at michael@coremichael.com.
When's our next one? We got another power couple next time.
We also might want to do a famous, well-known couple once a month and do an individual couple in between. So I think it'll depend on what we receive from people. So really an awesome and wonderful pleasure to be here with you and to do this work. And you want to tell people how they can find you?
Sure. So they can find me either at my website, justincrocodilesy.com, or easier way is just to email me at justin.lz@gmail.com. And what about you, Michael?
For me, best way is you can check out my website at coremichael.com or email me at michael@coremichael.com. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. What a great pleasure, Justin.
You too. And we look forward to seeing everybody at our next episode, and we'll break down another couple's relationship. And are they in or are they out?